This is the Fitness Wisdom Podcast.
Carbohydrates are making you fat, diabetic, and inflamed. Today, we're going to be revealing the untold truth about carbohydrates. And I have Zane Griggs on the podcast to share this awesome knowledge and wisdom with you and to bring the nuanced conversation about carbohydrates. Welcome to the show, Zane. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, Andreas. I appreciate the invitation. We've had some great conversations about this already, but it'd be great to unpack it a little bit more, a little more detail, a little more nuance. So I'm looking forward to this.
100%. And I love your nuanced perspective and the way that you're educating the masses. You know, you all have this non-dogmatic view about diet and you're just trying to optimize people's health, right? So maybe just tell people who don't know about you, who don't know anything about you, who you are and what you do and where people can find you.
Okay. My name's Zane Griggs. As you said, I've been a health coach and trainer for 27 years, since 1998. I've been basically got into that field because I started experimenting with diets much earlier in the mid 90s to avoid with the hope of avoiding metabolic disease for myself, because I saw it was impacting my older relatives, and I didn't want that for me. And for some reason in my 20s, I got this sense of mortality about all this, heart disease or diabetes, and I didn't want that to be how I had spent the last 10 years of my life. And then as I got into the space, I was experimenting with diet, experimenting with vegan and vegetarian diets, which didn't go well for me, but I learned a lot. And then as I got into the health space and started working as a trainer, I found low carb was at least initially effective for many people to correct some eating habits, to lose some weight, help lower their blood sugar. And then lapping on top of that, for myself, intermittent fasting, fasted workouts. So I was really leveraging metabolic stress, and I was doing this for a very long time. I was promoting low carb for close to 20 years. I started introducing intermittent fasting and fasted workouts on top of that for about 10 years in my own workouts, until I kind of hit this wall where I just was burnt out, overtrained. My blood work didn't look good. I had kind of higher blood sugar. My thyroid was stressed, was taxed, and I just didn't feel good. I looked good, but I was running out of steam, not sleeping well, felt overtrained and underfed. And that's when I had to step back and say, what's going on here? Why aren't all these wonderful hormetic stressors working for me like they're supposed to? It's supposed to make me a stronger, more resilient human, and all they were doing was tearing me down. And so that's when I started digging and started making some changes, asking more questions, talking to people outside of my kind of bubble of low carb, and digging in a little more, finding research, changing my diet, getting rid of the fasting, adding carbs, and really digging in. And that was about almost 3 years ago now, 2.5, 3 years ago, that I really started experimenting and unpacking a completely different perspective on really feeding this body for metabolic health, and really opened my eyes to some things that I was just completely blind to for a long time. And it's been quite a little journey there to do that. It's I don't take it lightly, and so and I'm just trying to help people understand that it's like we've been conditioned to believe certain things, and now we think they're true. Right. And we have to look past the conditioning or look past the confusion and really see what research lines up with personal experimentation and how they come together. And so that's a long-winded introduction, but that's kind of where I am. It's been eye-opening. It's been humbling. I feel like I've had to apologize for years of in a sense, directing people or kind of teaching people the wrong thing. And that was hard. So in my shift, many people, I kind of think I'm kind of making this decision quickly, kind of just flipping. And it's really been 2.5 years of experimenting and trial and error, and looking back on 20 plus years, 30 years of experimentation and seeing patterns. And then once you get things, when it kind of the more light you have, the more you can see the error in your patterns from the past. And it just brings a lot more clarity. But I've learned so much more from my mistakes than the things I got right.
I love your story. It's very inspiring, actually. And it's really funny because I also transitioned to eating more carbohydrates as well around, like, when was it? It was probably also like around 2 years ago as well, because I was also doing like a keto carnivore. And I always had this belief since I transitioned back from a plant-based diet, which I was also doing for 5 years. And then I went into an animal-based diet. And from animal-based, I went to keto carnivore, and I stayed there for quite a while. And then that totally like wrecked my health, and my hair started falling out, affected my thyroid. I started gaining weight, even though I was eating a huge amount of calories for my body mass, you know? And then basically, like, when I introduced the carbohydrates back, I did notice some symptoms of insulin resistance, like my body wasn't tolerating the carbohydrates well. And then that gave me that confirmation bias that, oh yeah, that you see, the plants are trying to kill me. I don't feel great. Like, you know, and then I went back to low carb again because I didn't feel so good, you know, when I introduced the carbs back, because my body was just so used to pumping that glucose itself, you know, in that gluconeogenesis, that stress state, that my body became insulin resistant. So when I introduced them back into my system, I was also having like a hard time to like adapt, you know, back. And then after, it took maybe like half a year to a year before my body was fully okay with having carbohydrates again, which I was absolutely shocked about, because I was thinking that I was insulin sensitive, you know, because I have enough muscle mass and I train a lot and so on. But at the same time, my body was giving me different signs. It was kind of crazy. And it's so funny how we stick to something like yourself, and also for myself, where even if it doesn't support our health, we keep doing it because we think that, or we're told that it's the right thing. You know, we're told that, oh yeah, like go keto, go carnivore, because this is going to improve your metabolic health. This is going to like help you lower your blood sugar. And it might do all of those things initially. It depends where, I guess, where every individual is coming from. If you're coming from a standard American diet and you go to carnivore, of course, that's going to like help you massively, right? Because you're going to help eliminate a lot of the junk food. You're going to do like a metabolic reset. You're going to allow your body to maybe become more metabolically flexible, start burning fats instead of carbs all the time, and maybe allow this switch to occur. But then if you stay stuck there and you don't use these diets as a tool and not as, you know, long-term strategies, then it can lead to a whole host of other issues that no one is talking about. And that's exactly why we're having this conversation today, because both you and me will have this experience, as well as many other people, which you share through your social media channels as well. Like all of their, you know, these anecdotal stories where people are coming from low carb and keto, and then they are literally transforming their health by reintroducing carbohydrates. And I think it's so important to have this nuanced discussion. So like, you know, I feel like a lot of this confusion about carbohydrates has originated from keto and carnivore, you know, diets. Would you agree? Guys, if you haven't already, smash that subscribe button and the like button. Now back to the show.
Absolutely. Yeah. When I started looking at them, it came from the Atkins diet, which had been making a resurgence. Atkins had kind of been big around the end of the 80s, early 90s. Yeah. Then it kind of faded a little, then it started having another resurgence at the end of the 90s, early 2000s, which is when I came across it. And like you said, it can be a nice reset. It's a good way to clean out some junk food. It might even be a good way to help the gut kind of restore some by getting rid of some of the processed foods, the processed oils, the grains that can be feeding a dysbiosis. Yes. It can help clear up some gut issues. Although you can do that without going keto. You could do all those things without going keto or carnivore. But those diets, when done properly, can certainly help with those things. They can clean up the gut and clear out some junk food. But they definitely, I think that's definitely where we see a lot of the misinformation coming from, is this of the fear of carbohydrates, and this fear of this misunderstanding, I think, of why blood sugar goes up and why people have insulin resistance, and they don't, and not a misunderstanding of what causes insulin resistance.
Yes.
And it's very surface level. It's very symptom chasing, rather than really looking at the root cause.
100%. So maybe let's dive into that then, and then maybe we can tie that into what's normally supposed to happen, you know, in a healthy person with a healthy metabolism when they eat carbohydrates, what is actually supposed to happen, you know, to their blood glucose, to their insulin levels, versus what actually happens in insulin resistance. Because a lot of people don't even know, even we throw these words around, like me and you, we totally know what it is, but there's a lot of people who still don't know what it is. So maybe if we can explain it in simple terms for people.
Explain insulin resistance?
Yeah, if you can go into insulin, what is insulin resistance? Yeah.
Yeah, that's, you know what, and my concept of insulin resistance is really changing over the last couple of years as well, where I would have told you a few years ago that it was the tissues in your body that are basically get tired of responding to insulin. They almost become like they develop a resistance like you would to a drug, because they've been impacted by insulin so many times from blood sugar elevations from our diet that the muscle no longer responds, or the tissue no longer responds to the insulin. And so it's not letting the glucose in. That's where most people think. And that's what even a lot of doctors would tell you. That's really not the case. Generally, insulin resistance can start at the liver, and there is some insulin resistance like that happens at the liver, but it's really not, it's not like what I just described, where it's like, oh, it's just been impacted by insulin so much, it just doesn't want to respond anymore. That's not how it works. But the symptom that everyone is looking at is the rise in blood sugar. And so they're assuming that because your fasted blood sugar is going up, so your blood sugar when you haven't eaten for many hours is higher than normal, or maybe your A1C is showing up as higher than it's out of a normal range, because it's the same thing, too much glycation, too much blood sugar at a baseline level in the bloodstream. It's because the insulin is just not working with the tissues. That's actually not the case. What's happening is that there's a competition for these substrate, for fat and glucose to be metabolized in the mitochondria. And there's this concept called the Randall cycle, which was kind of expressed or published about in the 1960s. So going back, we've had this concept explained for many decades. But within a singular mitochondria, it can only metabolize either fat or glucose at a single time. What tends to happen when there's a lot of fat available, an excessive amount of fat to be oxidized, is that fat will block the entry of glucose into the mitochondria and cause some metabolic dysfunction as well. But primarily, let's just keep it simple. It's like blocking the entry of glucose into the mitochondria, so the glucose can't be metabolized. And so the glucose ends up backing up in the system because it can't get into the mitochondria. And if this happens to enough mitochondria in the body, then you see the blood sugar begin to rise. And of course, insulin goes up with it to try to control the blood sugar. But it's a little bit like the analogy I use. It's like a clogged sink. So when you turn on the faucet to a clogged sink, right, the water rises, doesn't go through. Turning off the faucet doesn't fix the sink. It just makes it so you can't see that there's a clog because you're not adding water to it. Yeah. But turning off the faucet doesn't fix the clog. If you want, and so that's the same concept here we have with insulin resistance or the rising blood sugar. We got a clog in the mitochondria caused by the excessive fat oxidation. It's not letting the glucose in. So glucose is rising. Well, when you stop eating glucose, stop eating carbohydrates, you're essentially turning off the faucet. The carbohydrates aren't causing the problem; they are revealing it. Yes. They are pointing the finger at, look, we got a problem in our metabolism, in our mitochondria, not allowing the glucose in. And so turning off the faucet doesn't really fix the clog. You've got to get down there and you've got to fix the clog in the mitochondria. And once you do that, the glucose can go in, and then your sink drains, right? Your backup of glucose is able to be metabolized and used for energy properly. Now, it's a very simplified version of it. There's a lot of hormonal actions taking place that really involve the elevation of what we call stress hormones, although some people debate that name, but it's basically cortisol, adrenaline, and glucagon are involved at different times to create this stress response. Because what often happens when you have beyond the excessive amount of fat and the blocked mitochondria, those stress hormones also stimulate the release of glucose from the liver. And that those stress hormones are turning on not only the release of glucose, but if the liver runs out of glucose, it will tell it to make more. Those stress hormones will help take other substrate in the body, other material like amino acids,
amino acids. Yeah.
Yeah, amino acids, glycerol, and that gets argued about like what percentage of what, but I think what the real problem is the stress hormones, and they're causing this glucose production. And where the insulin resistance comes in is that normally in a healthy body, when blood sugar goes up and insulin goes up to handle that blood sugar, it turns off the liver's release of glucose. It's certainly not going to make more glucose from gluconeogenesis. It's not going to make more glucose, but it's going to shut off that valve. But what happens in this situation of insulin resistance is that even though blood sugar is going up and insulin's going up, it's not turning off the sugar coming out of the liver. So we have an excessive amount of fat, free fatty acids being released from fat stores to be remetabolized, to be turned into energy, blocking glucose. And we have a lot of glucose being released from the liver at the same time that normally would have been shut off by the insulin. So you've got a lot of energy coming to blocked mitochondria and a system that is, imagine you had a second source of water. You turn off that faucet, but you got a second source of water still bumping water in on a trickle, a little bit more. And so eventually you are going to still see the backup of glucose over time. So we have this system that's basically putting out a lot of energy, that it's more energy than your body can handle. And so then you have a backup of this potential energy, whether it's glucose or fat in the blood. And that's where people start attacking the symptom, which is the elevated blood sugar or the elevated insulin, but not addressing the root cause, which is the clog. And the stress hormones, really.
That's a fantastic breakdown. Yeah, that's fantastic. And so basically what you're saying is that, because those fuel sources, a lot of people don't actually understand that, protein and fat are both fuel sources for the body. I think it's so important for people to understand that protein is not meant to be used as a fuel source. It's more like as a building block for the body. Only in times of emergency, I guess there is a reason why your body can use, protein, right? Because it's for emergency situations, like breaking down protein into amino acids to make glucose. But that shouldn't be our primary way that we are fueling the body. So it should be either fats or carbohydrates. And basically, like what's happening, what you're saying is that for whatever reason, the fat is actually blocking the ability for the glucose to enter the mitochondria to process it. And that's why the blood glucose remains elevated. And people think it's because they're eating, a lot of carbohydrates, but then you can see a lot of people who don't eat carbohydrates, they still have elevated glucose levels. So that's actually telling you something that, hey, now, like, it's not actually the carbs the problem. There's something on a fundamental level not working here, right? On a mitochondrial level or on a cellular level, the machinery is broken. It's not processing the energy. And so what can actually cause, you just mentioned there about this clogging, with the fat being there present and not prioritizing the glucose utilization, what can actually cause this competing energy source, substrate, even if we're not eating, let's say?
Even if you're not eating. Yeah, that's where you have, there's a couple factors, I think, that are primary. I think it is somewhat multifactorial. I think the two biggest that we're dealing with in our current, culture with diet, start with they start with oxidative stress. So which the oxidative stress could be caused by a number of things, but really all disease starts with oxidative stress. And what that means is you've got something that creates inflammation, right? That is overwhelming your endogenous antioxidant production, and your body can't control it. So you've got inflammation out of control, which then disrupts other functions in the body. All right. Or causes disease in some way that the body's unable to keep up with the healing. And so in this case, we have oxidative stress, in one case in the mitochondria, which can cause reduction of energy being produced. So we have, let's say, someone who's eating a lot of seed oil, so polyunsaturated fats, which are very oxidative. That means they're more susceptible to free radicals or oxygen molecules getting in and creating it'd be like rust
Oxidative
on
damage.
metal. Basically you're creating oxidative damage to that fat. And because saturated fat has a full, like, basically you think of a fence of made of hydrogen ions around the outside of a fat. Well, saturated fat has a complete full fence of hydrogen all the way around it. Monounsaturated fat, so one unsaturated, has one opening. They're called double bonds, has one opening where it doesn't have that hydrogen in place. And that's one vulnerability for the oxygen to get in there. But otherwise, it's a pretty stable fat. Polyunsaturated fats have 2 to 4 to 5 different openings in that fence that would allow oxygen molecules to get in there to create oxidative stress, oxidation, oxidative damage. Our mitochondria literally burn these fats with oxygen. And so they bring they have an abundance of these very oxidative fats. So more than our bodies should really handle, like we would have from your standard American diet, highly processed foods, which are full of these fats, right? These fats have become replacing our monounsaturated and saturated fat in our food system. And so we have an abundance of these fats coming to the mitochondria, causing oxidative stress in the mitochondria, which lowers the energy production of that mitochondria. It can actually damage it or have it shut down. And we have a reduced energy production. Then the brain is like, hey, red alert. We're not getting the energy we're used to getting. We don't want these cells to die. Let's start pulling energy from somewhere else. Let's start making more energy, pulling energy from somewhere else. So it might pull some sugar out of the bloodstream, some glucose out of the bloodstream to help bring in more energy. But then all the other systems kick in as well. And so we have an elevation of these stress hormones to release more fatty acids, stored fat into the bloodstream, as well as the glucose from the liver. And so now we have all this energy coming into the system to replace the energy that's not being made by the mitochondria, by the stressed out, oxidized mitochondria. And so that creates this kind of turmoil where we got elevated stress hormones. We have all this new energy being pumped into the bloodstream, and we have mitochondria that are sending out a distress signal that they're not making enough energy. That is kind of the upstream root cause of these stress hormones and the excessive amount of fat being released. The other thing that could cause the oxidative stress is in the gut, which would be like maybe an endotoxin in the gut. You've got some inflammatory, problems going on with the gut, which creates like a leaky gut issue, and those endotoxins escape and start causing oxidative stress in other tissues in the body. So those can also lead to insulin resistance if they're impacting energy or just stress hormone response. So anything that you have enough oxidative stress to create a stress response by the body, which elevates these stress hormones, that is the kind of stage one leading to this insulin resistance, and what they found in studies is that, like for instance, a type 2 diabetic, their fat oxidation, which is generally driven by the stress hormones, but their fat breakdown, free fatty acids going in the body, being broken down from fat cells being released in the system, is about 50% higher than a healthy body. So they have a 50% more fat oxidation going on, and 30% higher gluconeogenesis than in a healthy body. So they've got a type 2 diabetic with high insulin levels and blood sugar. Everyone's worried about the blood sugar.
Yeah.
But what's happening upstream is they have high stress hormones releasing 50% more fat than a healthy person, 30% more gluconeogenesis. And many times their liver is trying to oxidize fat twice as fast as it would normally. And so all that excessive fat available is where we start getting the problems with the mitochondria and the competition of the mitochondria, where we don't have room for the glucose to get in to be metabolized.
Wow. Imagine spiking your blood sugar without eating cake, elevating cortisol, your stress hormone, without being stressed, and suppressing your body's most powerful sleep, antioxidant, and regeneration hormone, which is your melatonin. This is why I make sure to wear my yellow daytime blue light blocking glasses every time where I spend time indoors under artificial lights and in front of screens, to protect my eyes from oxidative stress and my entire body. And if I'm going to be exposed to artificial blue light, especially after sunset, I'm going to wear my red lens blue light blocking glasses to support my melatonin production and release. So if you want to protect your energy levels, sleep, and biology from artificial blue light, head over to the description and you will find all of the links with a massive discount on my favorite blue light blocking glasses. So what I understood from that's fantastic. What I understood from what you actually just said there, that it's so little to do with food. And this is something that I have been hammering home like all the time to people, that yes, like the food that we eat is important, but what's actually governing really the food, how we process, is our nervous system state. And our nervous system state is governed by what you just said there from the inflammation, for example. You have too much oxidative stress. Now you're in this sympathetic dominant state, right? Which is you're in this stress state. So when you're in this stress state, now your body is not going to absorb basically the fuel very well, right? If you think about running away from a threat all the time, from a tiger, your body doesn't care about digestion, metabolic health, looking lean and jacked and having energy, having beautiful hair and skin. It doesn't care about that. It cares about your survival. So when we're stuck in this survival state, our body obviously is not going to absorb and utilize the fuel efficiently, right? And it's of course going to pump out a lot of triglycerides, like you said, from the adipose tissue, and the glucose as well for that quick energy source. But when that becomes chronic, and our body's stuck in this fight and flight state, in this stress state, stress nervous system state, now you have all of this byproduct that your body's producing itself because it's stuck in this stress state, and you're eating on top of that additional fuel. And so that's basically adding fuel to the problem, but that doesn't mean that the fuel is actually the source of the problem. And that's actually what we're trying to get at here with Zane, is that the fuel, we vilify basically like what looks like it's the same thing when you look at the saturated fats. A lot of people vilify saturated fat for heart disease, right? Because it can be there when there is atherosclerotic plaque in the arteries. It can be there present, a little bit like a fireman. Well, people are blaming like carbohydrates as well the same way, because they see it high in insulin resistance and type 2 diabetes. They're assuming that it's the cause of the problem, but it's actually no, it's just highlighting that there is a problem present and the body actually, cannot utilize that fuel. So that was a really great breakdown. Thank you so much. So what kind of symptoms can people experience if they have chronically elevated blood glucose? Because of course we both know that chronically elevated blood glucose is obviously not a good thing, right? Because it indicates like poor metabolic health, poor insulin sensitivity. Obviously, we don't want to have chronically elevated blood glucose. So what kind of symptoms can people experience when they have chronically elevated blood glucose, just in case they are not measuring their blood glucose, right? With like some kind of continuous blood glucose monitor, how can they identify that they may be having some elevated blood glucose issues?
That's a great question, because many times it goes undiagnosed. We have, like, for instance, in the US, we have our official diagnosed rate of type 2 diabetes is 13%. But the estimate on undiagnosed, it ranges from 27% to some in the 30 something, 35% of the population is undiagnosed and definitely pre-diabetic. But we could have twice as many people with diabetes, but only half of them are diagnosed and they don't know it. You might have some, it's really the symptoms are somewhat varied. You might have some issue with energy going up and down, right? Where you just feel very drained. Your blood sugar is going up and down and up and down, and not very stable. I think where a lot of the problems really begin is with the elevated stress hormones in the background, which can impact thyroid. And so, and the use of, the ability of your thyroid to do its job, not just to help turn and what's going on in the mitochondria, help turn energy, potential energy or food energy into ATP. What starts happening is, instead of being turned into ATP or cellular energy, it gets stored as fat because it's in a stress state.
Yes.
And so that stress impacts how well you turn it into cellular energy. So it starts storing fat, especially if it thinks you're starving, because there's low energy being made, and you're breaking down all this fuel. You're basically in a catabolic state, right? You're breaking down all this fat and breaking down and creating all this glucose. Yes. You're in a catabolic state. And so it wants to turn down energy production and start storing some of this fat. Thyroid also, dysfunctional thyroid and elevated cortisol can lead to lower testosterone levels, because the thyroid helps convert cholesterol into testosterone. Cortisol can stimulate some aromatase activity, which of course converts testosterone into estrogen. So you got to get some fat gain. And I think that's the most common one. People see a little bit of fat gain, a little bit of lethargy, maybe they're tired all the time, brain fog. And I think it's all related. I think there's more than just the issue with the blood sugar and the insulin that are the problem. It's much more, it's the interaction, right?
Yes.
The conflict with all of these hormones that are affecting the whole system. And so it's really, to pinpoint the symptoms, should really cause you to go get blood work so you can get eyes on what's happening.
Yeah.
So if you start having the brain fog, the dizziness, lack of energy, fat gain, you need eyes on what's going on inside. You're looking at the outside, you're still looking at symptoms, but we don't want to chase symptoms. We want to look at what's going on.
Yes.
with hormone levels, with blood sugar levels. So that's where, you know, you want to, and you want to have someone who knows what they're talking about, looking at that to help you interpret those
Yes.
as well. So that's, it's a nuanced answer because different people may have different, depending on where they are in the stage of insulin resistance, they might have different symptoms. One person shows one set of symptoms, another person shows another set.
Yes.
Some go completely unnoticed because they're just not paying attention.
Yes.
Or it's a new normal for, you
Mm.
know.
I think the most dangerous like form of diabetes or insulin resistance is when you are skinny diabetic, because like that can go
Right.
very easily underdiagnosed. You can be ripped, you know, like have like a six pack or whatever, and you can still have like sky high blood glucose and triglycerides. And I feel like it's actually more healthy for people to gain fat because their body is actually storing away the energy and it's not circulating in the bloodstream constantly, right? So it's not like causing a lot of like oxidative damage due to having like chronically elevated blood glucose versus like it being put away in fat tissue. Of course, having more fat tissue has its own issues for sure, but I feel like the body has fat tissue like as a survival response and as a safety mechanism for many different reasons. For example, when we're exposed to different environmental pollutants and toxins, the body may store more body fat in order to preserve our organs so those pollutants and toxins don't go to our brain and our vital organs. So it's going to store away a lot of those endocrine disruptors, environmental pollutants and chemicals until it sees that our body can, you know, is cleaner and is able to detoxify and start, you know, dumping them back into the bloodstream and into the lymphatic system to purify. And I feel like it's the same thing with the basically the sugar as well, that like a dysfunctional system is not able to put away like into the fat tissue. Do you know why people, for example, somebody who is a skinny diabetic, why actually they wouldn't be able to put it away into their fat in the first place, the excess blood
There
glucose?
are a few reasons that may be different for different people. So there's just certain phenotypes, certain body types. Like someone from Northern Europe is more likely to store a lot of subcutaneous fat in their body, like under their skin, around their whole body, and put on that fat even before they become really have a high level of insulin resistance. They're more likely to start storing that fat, like you talked about, which is healthier,
Yes.
rather than as much going into visceral fat, where we see a lot of people from Asian ethnicities that they won't store a lot of fat in their arms and legs, but they'll store it in their visceral area, in their midsection, under the muscle and around the organs. And that's where we really see some disease, where we start storing around heart, liver, kidneys, and they see a lot of their fat. And what's called the theory is a personal fat threshold. And it's referring to subcutaneous fat, or the fat right under the skin all over the body. And some people, just generally speaking, from Northern Europe, tend to have a higher fat threshold. You know, they can handle more body. They have a tendency to store more body fat before those fat cells become sick or full and start spilling out the triglycerides back into the bloodstream. Whereas the people who have a lower fat threshold, their fat cells in their subcutaneous area tend to hit a maximum limit a little sooner. And then if they get overstuffed, that fat starts spilling out into the bloodstream and then ends up being collected around the visceral a little sooner before they get really billowy and big and fat. So that's one theory. If someone is really active, like you mentioned, like the athletes who look kind of thinner or leaner, they're athletic people, but their diet maybe isn't so great. They might be using up, their muscles may be using up a lot of the fat, they might be getting some fat in the muscle, some intramuscular fat, and creating some insulin resistance there, but they aren't putting on the billowy fat, but they might be getting some visceral fat around their liver or their heart or their kidneys, which is then impacting the metabolic function. So there's more than one reason why why some people, it just looks different on some people than it does on others. And some are genetic and some are lifestyle driven. And just how their body's responding to cortisol. I mean, and that's what, not to get there too soon, but we can see these elevated blood sugar levels in more than just your traditional, metabolically unhealthy people. We can see it from corticosteroid use, right? From people who are taking corticosteroids for an injury, and that elevates the stress, the cortisol, the glucagon, the stress response. which then temporarily, while they're on that drug, can cause weight gain, can cause some elevated blood sugar. Uh, and then as you've seen, we've talked about, with people on a very, very low carb diet for an extended period of time, which relies a lot on stress hormones, or someone who's fasting a lot, like I was doing, and has a big workout, so a heavy workout routine with a lot of fasting under fueling, your body's trying to compensate for that stress and for the lack of energy. So the stress hormones are elevated, which are releasing all the triglycerides and producing all the glucose from the liver. And you could see over time that would slowly start to raise someone's blood glucose or A1C. They have what's called a physiological insulin resistance, which is easily reversed usually, like you dealt with that yourself, like trying to reintroduce carbohydrates. To where the tissue is trying to preserve that glucose for the brain, primarily in the nervous system, which really loves glucose. And so it just won't let the muscles use it. But over time, you get elevated stress hormones, you get a lot more glucose production from gluconeogenesis and the other tissues preserving the use of the glucose. And over time, that their blood glucose starts to go up. And mine got into the 90s on a consistent basis, I should say. And I didn't like that. That was enough for me. But I have seen people on very low carb, ketogenic carnivore diets where they post their blood work and it's over 100, over 110, over 120. And their A1Cs are at 6, 6.1, 6.2. So diabetic level blood sugar and A1C on a pretty much zero or ketogenic level low carb diet. And it's stress. It's stress driven. To me, it's hard to justify. You'll hear some of them justify it. I think if you have that happening in your body, there's whatever caused it, it's still a problem.
It's unhealthy.
Whether it's unhealthy. It's an unhealthy state.
You just have to say how it is, because there's no dancing around this this discussion. I just feel like, if you're elevating your stress hormones chronically, is that a good excuse? Absolutely not. Because do you want to burn out your adrenals? Do you want to fry your thyroid? Because a lot of people who are doing these diets chronically and they are coming back to reintroducing carbs, they are saying that how their energy levels are getting restored, their thyroid function is improving, their hair is coming back, all of these different things. They're finally losing body fat after 8-10 years carnivore. They're starting to drop the body fat they've been trying to lose forever. And one thing that a lot of people tend to not understand is that your metabolism is not only governed by what you eat. So for example, exactly what you just said there, so much about the stress, right? The stress is literally governing your metabolism and altering your ability to utilize fuel efficiently. And so therefore that's elevating your blood glucose. And so basically, that's a lot of people think that, okay, I'm doing a ketogenic diet, therefore I'm in ketosis. No, I say this all the time, that if you're stressed, you can actually not be in ketosis at all. If you're doing carnivore, no way you're in ketosis, because actually if you're eating so much protein and very little fat, now you're just running on gluconeogenesis because you're converting amino acids into glucose. So if you want to do a true ketogenic diet, it's actually very little protein and very high fat, because that actually ensures that the body is able to, tap into using those ketones. But actually, if you eat a lot of protein and minimal fat and low carb or zero carb, then you're going to be converting that protein into fuel. And what we said earlier, we don't want to be using a building block for fuel. We want to be using a fuel source as an energy source. And this is so important for individuals to understand. I think that the reason why there is so much tribalism online is because a lack of understanding of physiology, on a fundamental level. It's talking about diets is such a surface level, what's actually happening under the hood. You're explaining it so beautifully right now. You're saying oxidative stress, inflammation, high cortisol, stress levels, sympathetic dominance, sympathetically driven state, what causes all of these things. You have artificial blue light, you have non-native EMFs, you have lack of sleep, you have under-muscled, you're all the time eating seed oils. All of these things are contributing to insulin resistance. And then when you eat carbs, you blame the carbs. It doesn't make any sense. But then when you hear it like this, you understand.
Yeah, we've eaten these foods for 10,000 plus. We have recorded history let me put it this way. We've eaten them longer than this, but we have
Yes.
recorded history of cultivating tubers and rice and wheat and push fruit. I mean, most of most of the civilization early on was around near the equator. So they were
Yes.
finding honey, they were finding wild fruit, and then cultivating it for 10,000 years without an epidemic of metabolic disease like we're seeing now all over the world. This level of metabolic disease where it's impacting the majority of the populations of the westernized countries, of the industrial countries, and now even going into Asia as well, which was for a long time like the longevity countries like Japan and Okinawa, and they're seeing these issues as well with the introduction of all the processed food, with the fast food, the foods cooked in these oils. We are seeing, never has there been a problem with obesity and diabetes and all these new diseases, even heart disease, 120 years ago. But as soon as we introduced processed food, we saw all of these diseases start rising right along with the usage of the processed food. But we've been eating carbohydrates in some form,
Yes,
as a majority of our diet in most places in recorded history over 10,000 years. Obviously, it's longer than that, but that we can see where there was no record of disease, of chronic disease epidemic like we have now. We had famine, we had drought, we had infectious disease, but we didn't have diseases that started within our body as a result of
metabolic
our diet.
disease. Yeah.
Metabolic disease. Yeah, we didn't have metabolic disease on any kind of scalable level like we see now that is in every industrialized country. It does not make sense to blame food that we've been eating for 10,000 years without disease, without recorded disease.
Yeah,
exactly. It's not just eating, not just finding, but growing tubers in South America and Africa intentionally for food, cultivating them, wheat in the Middle East, rice in Asia, cultivating these foods, not just hunter-gatherers.
Yeah.
But growing them in communities and creating our own food source. And in many of these places, it's 60 to 85%. Even indigenous cultures that are still hunter-gatherers, indigenous, they're not eating an industrial diet or a Western diet at all. 60 to 85% of their diet can be made up of carbohydrates of some form.
Yes.
Without disease. So it doesn't make sense to blame single ingredient whole food carbohydrates for that when we just had this level of metabolic disease developing for the last 120 years or so.
We've probably heard about red light therapy before and all the incredible benefits that it has to offer. But unfortunately, not all panels on the market are created equally. And this is why I only use and trust the ones that I have put in the description below. They have the highest quality panels on the market from build quality, aesthetics, and functionality. So if you want a massive 40% discount on my favorite red light therapy panels, head to the description below and make sure to use the promo code attached to get a massive 40% discount. Yeah, exactly. It's funny to blame like a specific food group, right? Because if that's something something which I say to a lot of people is a healthy body is supposed to be able to tolerate everything, fats, carbs, and protein, because our body is able to, process those things. Why does your body have insulin? Why is your body able to like have all these basic physiological functions in your body if you're not designed to have it, right? And of course, like if you overeat, like your body is designed to store body fat, right? Like this is because a lot of people say that, oh, if you spike insulin, you're going to store body fat. And people make these like funny comments without any context, right? But for example, if you spike insulin and you're not in like a calorie surplus, you're not going to store body fat. You have to give context to all of these different types of conversations because of course, social media makes everything so black and white, right? And this is why I love what you are doing on social media, because you're actually giving like the nuanced perspective and you're just sharing the facts with people. And this is just how it is. Here it is on a plate for you, and do what you will with the information, And so, as you said there, like, what has actually changed over these, 100 years? Well, we've had the introduction of what you said, like processed foods. That's a huge contributor. Like for sure. And then you've got processed light, artificial light, which is also spiking our cortisol levels after dark. Then you've got like non-native electromagnetic fields, another stressor. We've got emotional, psychological stress more than ever right now, right? We're running away from invisible threats in our head 24/7, even though there is no actual threat present in our environment. So all of these things are affecting our physiology. They're raising our cortisol, raising our stress hormones, they're making us insulin resistant even without consuming food. And that's actually what I'm trying to say is that, yeah, because like that's actually what has fundamentally changed. The environment has changed so much that the food, like we're blaming the wrong thing. Well, let's look at the environment, what has actually changed, not actually something that we've been eating, like you just mentioned, for thousands and thousands of years, which is actually like natural to our biology. So maybe let's demystify this a little bit, because, a lot of people hear that when you have people should be avoiding insulin spikes and high blood sugar. What's your thoughts? When you eat carbohydrates, do you want to be avoiding that? Like, what's your thoughts on that?
Well, you can't avoid it. You shouldn't avoid it because you can't. So that's a natural response, is that when you eat carbohydrates, your blood sugar goes up and then insulin is released and helps deliver those nutrients to tissues all over your body. The other benefit of having those carbs come in and insulin goes up is that that response turns off those stress hormones. Yes. It's actually counter-regulatory to, it's supposed to, in a healthy body, glucagon and cortisol. Where we have the problem is someone who's severely insulin resistant is when those stress hormones don't turn off even in the presence of insulin, and that's the insulin resistance. Insulin resistance is the stress hormones don't turn off when insulin is present. That's the real insulin resistance at the liver, and adrenals. It's like we're not turning that off. Insulin resistance is not because of the muscles. There is some level of that with the fat in the muscle over time that develops. And so the natural response is your blood sugar goes up, insulin's released, brings those nutrients to tissues, and within an hour, maybe an hour and a half, your blood sugar's back to normal. That's great. That's ideal. That's the design. That's how we're supposed to. That's how our bodies are supposed to respond. So those spike. You hear the fear of glycation. Glycation doesn't happen in an hour. Real glycation, like advanced glycation end products, people are talking about AGEs, the advanced those take months or years to develop. And so, and those usually happen in tissues. They don't really happen in the bloodstream unless you have the chronically elevated blood sugar, baseline fasted blood sugar all the time. If you have the elevated blood sugar that is in those ranges for whatever reason, for whatever upstream cause, you're sitting at a 110, 120 milligrams per deciliter blood sugar all the time. Now you've got extended exposure out of a normal range, which has much more risk than infinitely more risk, because you're elevated all day long or for most of the day, as opposed to your blood sugar goes up to 140, 150, and then comes down and it's back to normal in an hour. Area under the curve is elevated all day long, much, much greater exposure. But really, glycation happens in tissues, and it can happen not just from sugar, not just from blood glucose and fructose. It can happen with fats. It can happen with ketones in the production of, as byproducts, right, of other, not to get too nerdy or geeky, but in our energy system, we have byproducts that spin off from these process of turning energy, of turning potential energy into actual energy.
Yes.
That can create glycation. But at the same time, we have detoxification processes for that. So we have early stage before it becomes an advanced glycation end point. It's an early glycation end product, or it's an intermediary glycation end product, and those can be detoxified and reversed as long as everything is working while you're detoxifying. You don't have this steady high blood sugar going on. You don't have all this extra sugar backing up in tissues from insulin resistance. And so we've created a fear response around glycation. Oh my gosh, if my blood sugar goes up for an hour, I'm going to have all this glycation. No, that's silly. When you really look at how glycation works and the advanced glycation end product is formed, it doesn't make sense. It's not going to happen. It takes months or years to form those things. And so it's a lot of fear mongering and preying on the ignorance of most people about their physiology, which is not, I'm not criticizing them. I don't expect them to be experts about everything. They're experts in their field, but we're using jargon. People are using jargon to scare people into, and talking over their head, basically, in order to scare them into reacting, right? And having fear of real food. It's I have friends in that space that are telling people to do this, and I believe that the majority of them are well-meaning and they're really trying to help people. So I'm not implying, you know, that they have bad intentions. I think I know many
of
of them
course
have
not.
incredible
They
intentions
for
to
sure
help
believe
people.
it. They just bought into the idea that that's the way. And it's just that you have, because you
Correct.
have gone through trial and error, through your failures, you have come to understand what actually is supposed to be happening within the body. And you have found a better way that you don't need to be stressing your system out in order to be able to, like, reap peak health and metabolic health, right? You don't need to suffer all the time. Yes, we know that doing the hard things is important, yes, but doing them all of the time, 24/7, like through diet as well, is going to be a huge stressor for the system. And I feel like a lot of people, they just get super convinced because we have been fed this idea from the science as well, that the blood sugar and the
Yes.
diabetes, and you got to make sure that you don't eat too much sugar, because it's going to cause diabetes. I mean, if you eat sugar in isolation and you don't eat it with other things and your body's able to process and put it away quickly, I actually don't think there is an issue with even just straight table sugar. What's your thoughts on this?
It's not the sugar. Now, I think sugar, if you have a dysbiosis, if you have something out of balance in your gut already,
Yeah.
and like or SIBO or something like this, small intestine bacteria, or candida, parasites, maybe, eating sugar probably isn't a great idea, and it might add to the dysbiosis. I'm not telling you what to do there because that's a very nuanced, individualized approach. However, sugar, we've been eating sugar at a high level in the US, I'm going to say for the US, since the 1800s. It became available in the early 1800s, earlier mid 1800s, and it started ramping up. Okay, where we had no disease. In 1930, when our obesity rate was 5% and our rate of type 2 diabetes was 1/3 of 1%, 0.3%, their sugar intake we're still eating over 400 grams of sugar a day. Well, now we're closer to 5, but the increase is really minimal. It's like a 5 to 10% increase from 1930 to now. And in right around 2000, sugar consumption in the US began to drop. And I don't just mean table sugar, granulated sugar. Yes, we have high fructose corn syrup. Yes, we have other sweeteners. But according to our USDA, and I looked at the numbers, I saw a couple doctors post about this. I pulled the USDA file. I got my calculator out, did the math. I'm not just regurgitating something I heard. Yeah, I looked at the numbers from 1970 to 2023. And right around 2000, our sugar consumption started dropping. And I mean all caloric sweeteners. So sugar, high fructose corn syrup, certain other syrups are included as sugars. So anything that added calories that was used as a sweetener in the making of food. And we've dropped back to, in the US, within, I think, 20 calories, so 5 grams of sugar, of our 1970 levels, within 5 grams of sweetener of what it was in 1970. Yet, during that time it was dropping, obesity and diabetes are hockey sticking straight up. So we have sugar going down, diabetes and obesity hockey sticking straight up. They did not correlate at all. As the sugar went down, the disease went up. Those don't correlate. We're back down to 1970 levels for sugar, for sweetener, but we're not down to 1970 levels of disease. We've multiplied it many times over. They don't correlate. It's not the sugar. It's the sugar reveals it. The sugar shines a light on it. The sugar makes it evident and obvious.
Yes.
But it's not the root cause.
Yes. If I want to regulate my nervous system, reduce anxiety and depression, and get an instant feeling of calm, my go-to is grounding. And this is why I make sure to get my bare feet on the ground every single day as much as I can. You see, the body needs energy in order to function properly. And grounding is a massive source of energy for our body. Now, if I'm not grounding barefoot in the sea or on grass, I make sure to wear my earth runners, which are my favorite barefoot and grounding sandals. As you can see, they come with a white toe box to allow your feet to work as they should, and underneath there is a copper plug and the silver stitching through the lace to make sure that you are grounded at all times. So if you're serious about your health and nervous system, you definitely need to check them out. You'll find the link in the description below, and make sure to use the promo code attached to get a nice discount on my favorite barefoot grounding sandals. I love it. Yes, also as well, like, if you think about training, if somebody complains that their training doesn't feel good, or if they have aches and pains, or they don't have energy in their training, they blame their training. But what about What about the 23 hours outside of your training? What are you doing outside those 23 hours? Like, how are you spending your life? You know, are you stressing yourself out? Are you not sleeping? Are you undernourished? Are you not eating real food? Like, are you not taking care of yourself? You know, are you not doing any stretching or mobility? Don't blame your training just because your lifestyle is crap, right? It's the same thing with your body. I'm not just saying that people's bodies are crap,
Right.
but I'm just saying that if the underlying mechanism, like in your body, if you're having mitochondrial dysfunction, if you're having metabolic dysfunction, like metabolic inflexibility, you're not able to utilize the fuel that you're putting in. That doesn't mean that the fuel is actually the issue. We're actually just revealing the problem. So going back to what you mentioned there about the blood glucose and the insulin spike, you know, a lot of people, they love to do walks like after a meal to lower the blood glucose, like a postprandial walk, or because there's these ideas that you must do a walk straight after your meal to lower your blood glucose, right? And or take like cinnamon or apple cider vinegar before a meal to make sure you don't spike that blood glucose. What's your opinion on all of this? Because in my opinion, I'll share with my opinion first, is that a walk straight after a meal is unhealthy, because you're actually like supposed to be rest and digesting after a meal. You're not supposed to be walking straight after. Your body's designed. The reason why you feel like you want to lay down after a meal is because you're supposed to lay down after a meal. Your body's literally telling you, lay down, do nothing, just chill. I'm resting and digesting right now. I'm putting away the fuel source. I'm doing my thing. But then when you go and grab your body and you go and do like, you know, some high, you know, intense activity or even just walking, you're now shutting down your digestive, you know, response. Like, what's your opinion on this?
No, you would slow that down. I mean, I think it would depend on the pace. Obviously, everything's relative to your stress level. And that doesn't mean like bad if you eat a meal and then go for a walk with your spouse or your loved one, or and you take a stroll around the block. But to make it the healthier, like, oh, you better get up and walk off this. I see why they make this recommendation to diabetics, because they do have insulin resistance. And they want them to find a way to shuttle that glucose, because when you move, there are transports of the glucose into tissue that don't require insulin. And so it moves that glucose into independently of insulin. And so like if they're but again, they're still chasing a symptom. They're chasing the high blood sugar, and the high blood sugar is a symptom, like the weight gain is a symptom, like the fatty liver is a symptom. You're chasing symptoms. You're not addressing the root cause. And I don't find those super helpful for addressing the problem. And so chasing symptoms, if it makes, I don't know. I'm not as, I think there's nuance there, but definitely eating a big meal and then going to have a workout of some sort, or getting on there and, you know, get on your machine or your bike and going to and get your heart rate up. Yeah, getting your heart rate up in the zone 3, bad idea. Bad idea. If you're just out to dinner and you walk along the Strand and you're watching the ocean and you're seeing the sunset and you're enjoying yourself and you're relaxed. Yeah, I mean, I don't think that's harmful, and I may be wrong. I might think something different 5 years from now about that. I've gotten to the point where I allow myself to, I may not know everything. I may be wrong. I may find that I'm wrong 5 years from now, but I'm not wrong about eating a bunch of food and then going and hitting the gym or going into zone 3 training or higher or something like that. Yeah, that's a bad idea for sure. Those are things addressing the symptom. It's not much different than okay, eat your meal and then go take your insulin. And I realize some people need to take their insulin so they don't go into a diabetic, like have their blood sugar go through the roof, and they have to control it. I'm telling people not to take their medications.
No, we're not telling.
But that's addressing the symptom. No. What I'm saying is just addressing a symptom. It's not addressing the root cause. And so your walk, the apple cider vinegar, your cinnamon, these are not root cause solutions. That's basically what I'm saying. You're still, yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So basically, I was just thinking that if you are, the intention is everything. That, if you're, the way you just mentioned about going for a walk on the beach, after a meal, I just feel like if you're, intentionally, just going to take it easy and relax, I think that your nervous system state that you operate in from day to day is going to govern so much how you deal with the food that you eat versus like what you think that you're doing. Because if you think that, you're going to be able to manipulate your metabolism as much as you want, like it's not going to really work out for you, right? Because you're just going to be stressed out all the time. What you want to do is you want to optimize your health and well-being. So today we've talked a lot about the issues associated, with, fear-mongering carbs and, the issues that people like are experiencing. I just feel like it would be really good now if we talked a bit about solutions. How can people actually improve their metabolic health, their insulin sensitivity? What kind of tips can you give people?
Well, that's a big question. So as far as solutions go for these, what I've been finding, especially many of the people come to me right now, some are insulin resistant from their diet, maybe have weight to lose. That's been the traditional group. And then some are coming to me coming from a keto or carnivore diet where they have elevated blood sugar, they've put on weight, their thyroid's dropped, they have some of the hair loss. And so they're struggling with, what do I go now? What do I do? I can't, they can't diet harder. They realize dieting harder is not to their benefit, is not helping them. They're still having the same problems. Their energy's low, they're not sleeping well. And so the solution I've found for both is very similar, because we're correcting the upstream problem of the stress hormones and unclogging the mitochondria. And so it's and now how quickly we transition, or what that looks like, how quickly that change happens, will depend on the person. And many times coming from a ketogenic diet, sometimes you have to move a little slower with their ability to process carbohydrates. But basically, we want to do two things. We want to turn down the stress hormones. We want to reduce the amount of dependence on fat oxidation, or turn down the amount of fat being released in the bloodstream and that's being driven towards the mitochondria, so that we can get it out of the way for the blood sugar to come down. So that's two things happening at one time. We want to pull back dietary fat, drop it tremendously. So many people coming from these diets, so whether they're eating a lot of processed food, if they're eating a lot of processed food, they also have a lot of fat coming in, because even though we call them carbs, many of these carbs that are processed food also have an abundance of fat in them as well.
Yes.
Potato chips, donuts, pizza, all these things. So we're pulling back dietary fat. We're moving away from processed food, but we're pulling back dietary fat and increasing carbohydrate intake. And by pulling back the fat, we're taking off some of the extra load from the diet on the mitochondria that's from this, because they already have excessive fat oxidation. But a lot of this fat oxidation, again, is coming from the stress hormones. So we've got to turn off the stress hormones. And the quickest way to do that is to raise the carb intake so that insulin comes up enough to shut off the stress hormones from pumping out all the blood sugar, and from turning on the gluconeogenesis. And for a lot of these people in the keto diet, the reason those stress hormones are high is because of the lack of carbohydrates, because the body's like, we got to make more energy. We have carbohydrates. Let's pump out some more glucose from the liver, taking down fat and so we're doing two things at once. We're turning off the stress hormones by the increased carbohydrate intake, telling the body, relax, we've got enough food, you're okay, chill out, and letting insulin turn off the cortisol as well, and the glucagon. And by not continuing to load fat into the system that's already overloaded by fat. And over time, what begins to happen is that glucose level starts to drop, because it's able to get into the mitochondria. You have the pressure from insulin, you have the shut-off valve of or a reduction of the stress hormones, and then the more availability of more mitochondria to take in the glucose as the fat oxidation is reduced. And it's really considered like a pro-metabolic or bioenergetic approach, or some of the names that's been put on this approach. But basically, you're increasing energy production through glucose oxidation. So making glucose oxidation the primary fuel, and fat oxidation really a backup fuel, a lesser, much smaller degree. And again, do this for anyone wanting to lose weight, reverse insulin sensitivity, or reverse insulin resistance, reverse fatty liver, or just correct the insulin resistance from an extended low or no carb diet. It corrects the back of the root cause. It's the same issue. It's the same response to maybe two different stimuluses, but it's the same response: a lack of energy, increasing stress, and creating all this fat release and glucose production. And we're just turning it off with our diet.
That's amazing.
So it's pretty effective. I've actually had a few people who are coming like years carnivore, stuck, weight stuck, and not able to lose fat. Weight hadn't moved in 6 months, losing the hair, don't feel like working out anymore, no energy. Start increasing the carbs, pull back the fat, and you see the weight loss start within a week or two. And that's not everybody, but I've seen it with several people where the
Yes.
weight loss starts right away, and they start dropping a couple pounds within a few weeks, and like they haven't had any weight move, and all of a sudden 2 pounds comes off within a couple weeks. It's pretty dramatic, and they feel better. They have more energy, feel more like working out, feel more like doing a lot of things. They just feel better. And because their brain is awakened with more energy, and
Less stress.
dopamine tone returns, yeah. And there's less stress, there's less hormonal stress. So it's really remarkable, going back to this kind of really a traditional way of eating that corrects these problems without having to be super strict, without having to fit into a very narrow window of like your diet's got to be this perfect for this to work. You can't let in these things in here, and there's really a lot of flexibility with this diet. People
Yes.
can travel, they can go off plan a little bit on a weekend, or they can have a little more room to be imperfect, right? To be not so perfect, and it's still effective, which tells me, oh, this is a powerful mechanism
Cool.
we're putting back
Yeah.
into place, where we have resilience. We're adaptive again. Whereas on the old diet, we've lost the ability to be adaptive because we're so
Yes.
restricted. There's no room
Yes.
for error. And now you have all this flexibility with your diet, and there's room to go off plan. There's room to eat something you normally wouldn't eat. And
Yes.
it doesn't have this big negative impact on your
Yes.
on your health.
Exactly. No, that was perfectly
Yeah.
explained. Yeah, for sure. Because, I wrote an article actually just yesterday on Substack that, about burning fat does not equal fat loss. Because a lot of people assume that the fact that you're actually burning fat, because yes, you may be burning fat as a fuel, but does that mean that you're actually losing body fat? Especially in these keto and carnivore communities, they tell them, oh, just eat as much as you want. It's totally fine. Eat sticks of butter, like eat as much steak as you want. But if you're in a calorie surplus, you're 100% going to be gaining weight. And not only that, but if you're elevating your stress hormones and you're in a calorie surplus, well, hello, weight gain now, because you're not going to be even using that fuel that you're eating. It's just going to be stored away even faster into your adipose tissue. So this is, I think, what you're getting at here is that you don't actually need to be burning fat as a fuel in order to lose the body fat. What's your approach when it comes to calories in general for people? How do you calculate calories for people? Do you just tell people to eat whole foods? Like, what's your approach?
That's a great question. And I think there is some nuance there, because when you try to, a set formula for most doesn't always work.
No, it doesn't
as far
work.
as like weight because metabolic rate, sometimes their metabolic rate has to come back up.
Yes.
And so I think eating to satiety, eating to the point that you are no longer hungry, is important, as long as the person isn't like binge eating. But if they're just like,
Yes.
they have normal understanding of like whether they're hungry, that's a good sign. That's a good sign. If they're trying to correct something, it's like, you don't need, if you're going hungry, you're under eating. And so under eating would cause a reduction of the thyroid, could cause a down regulation of metabolism. We're trying to raise their metabolism.
Yes.
So with it, I've been playing with numbers and trying to find patterns. And it's an interesting question, because I'm still like looking for the right combination. What I've found is that if we start with protein, and I think with this approach to diet, like I used to recommend a bit more protein because people were on low carb, and so I knew they were using the protein for energy. But if we're not going to be using the protein for energy,
no,
and we have the benefit of insulin hanging onto muscle, a better target for protein, or a more usable, is 0.6 to 0.8 grams per pound. I can't remember what that is in kilos off the top
I
of my
agree,
head.
100%.
But that's right around, it's give or take right around about 20% of calories. If you get in that realm, that makes up about 20% of calories, give or take a little bit of room for variance. So, and you can calculate the kilos, I just don't have it at the top of my head. I used to know it, but it's closer to like a maybe 1.3 to 1.8. Is it grams per kilo? Is that what that would
It's
maybe
2.2.
be? I think
It's 2.2 pounds per kilo. So basically, like I don't know the exact conversion right now, but
Right. But I think it comes over somewhere right around, instead of 0.6 to 0.8 grams per pound, it might be like a 1.3 to 1.7 or 1.8 grams per kilo of protein. But don't quote me on the kilo, on the kilo conversion.
yeah, on the pounds, it's fine. Everybody can make the conversion.
Okay. So on the pounds, so that is where I find like a good spot to kind of target based on satiety. And then, and if that's about 20% of calories, that's of ideal body weight. Now, if you're 300 pounds, we know that's not your ideal body weight. And when you want to get down to 200, use that as your target.
Yes.
And then figure that you'll get a ballpark of that's 20%. So whatever that protein caloric is, multiply that by 5, there's your total calories. And so for weight loss, reversing insulin sensitivity or reversing insulin resistance, I kind of like to take fat down to maybe 20 or even 15%. For many people, that's definitely at 50 grams or less, depending how big they are. For some people, that can be as low as 30 grams of fat a day. And then the rest is carbohydrate, which could be a 60 or 65% of their calories coming from whole food carbohydrates. And you can't eat a lot of fatty meat to get your fat that low. You're looking at leaner cuts of meat.
Yeah.
Now, someone who's more active, like someone jacked like you, who's super active and athletic, they can get away with more fat, in my opinion. I'm not, but they can get away with more athletic and metabolically healthy. They can handle more fat. Like people think the opposite. Oh, it's because you're so active. I was like, I'm not as active as I'd like to be. I get stuck behind screens a lot, unfortunately. But if you're metabolically healthy and very active, I think they can handle sometimes more fat to stabilize energy, and the carbs can come down a little bit. But someone who really wants to reverse it and really start melting fat off or boost their metabolism and really, bring the blood sugar down and have their thyroid come back and have more energy, you got to bring the carbs up and the fat down, get that fat out of the way, and create almost like a fat deficit in a way rather than a caloric deficit. If we create a fat deficit, if your body really needs fat, it can take it from your body fat.
Yes.
Or if you really need to, you can make it from the carbohydrates. You can make saturated fat from carbohydrates if needed. But there's no reason to overconsume it, and which most people are doing. They're overconsuming fat. So I don't really address calorically. I look at I kind of back my way into the calories, beginning with the protein right around that window of 20%, and then build around that, and go with hunger. If they're just not hungry, I feel like I don't want anybody to force feed food, but they shouldn't be tremendously under eating. I'd rather create the fat deficit than a calorie deficit. That's why I'm approaching right now, because they've already been, especially if I have people coming from an energy deficit like keto or carnivore, I'm trying to raise, almost reverse diet. I'm trying to raise their metabolic rate, which means giving them more food. And if you have a really healthy metabolism, if you eat a little too much, like you and I, we'll burn it off as heat. We might we might go through our digestive system. We might just have more energy. In other words, we'll feel like I need to go out for a run. All of a sudden, we're kind of bouncy. We get a little antsy. We have all this energy. We just want to go out and use it. Or we turn off thermogenesis. We turn on as heat. That's how healthy metabolisms deal with excess calories.
Yes.
As opposed to just turning them into fat. You and I would really have to eat a lot. We'd have to, for me to gain fat, I got to increase my fat intake.
Yes.
I got to increase the fat I'm eating. So that's where it kind of flips the script a little bit. And a lot of people take a second to, they don't quite get it, and they're a little bit fearful if they've been coming from a more restrictive diet.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's what happens, right? When you give clear signals to your metabolism that, hey, this is the fuel source that I want you to focus on, then it's able to process that fuel source efficiently, because now you don't have these competing fuel sources like we talked about. And also another thing which we didn't touch upon was the fact when you're taking in carbohydrates, that signals to your nervous system that there is an abundance in the environment, because as human beings, we've always lived in connection with our environment, right? So when it's summertime and we have an abundance of carbohydrates, that's a signal to our body, hey, like we have an abundant fuel supply. You don't need to preserve your metabolic rate. You can just go raging. You can just burn through the fuel. We have abundant fuel source. So therefore, you don't need to dampen, your thyroid function. You can keep your metabolic rate nice and high. But a lot of people just think that, they can just cut out the carbohydrates and then their metabolism is just gonna, go along with it. But obviously when you go into ketosis, like it's normal for the body to downregulate its thyroid function. That's a normal physiological response, because it actually realizes, hey, like I need to, preserve, my fuel, because I'm not getting abundant carbohydrates from my environment. And so therefore I just got to make sure that I can store a lot of this as body fat. But, when you give the clear signals to your body that, hey, like you don't need to store the body fat, then there is no need to, because you're going to burn through it.
Yeah. But you'd be surprised how many people from that community who are the leaders, would deny the fact that the thyroid is negatively impacted by an extended ketogenic diet, because they, oh no, it's abundant. It's the better fuel, right? They create this hierarchy because the fat, it's better, rather than thinking about you're missing something that your body now has to create itself. And that stress response of having to create its own glucose is the very trigger. There's not enough fuel available. Conserve. It's winter. There's no fruit. There's no honey. It's winter. Conserve. We got to make it through the winter. And so it's absolutely, but it's amazing how much denial there is around that very well-documented response by the body. Very well documented. And we see it in athletes, where they look at college athletes who are trying to make weight for their sport, right? They're trying to drop their weight so they have a greater energy to weight ratio, that strength or power to weight ratio. Mm-hmm. And they'll go on a low calorie or low carb diet to drop the weight. And then their thyroid comes down, libido drops, energy's down, their sleep's disrupted, they start having hormonal dysregulation. It's called LEA, low energy availability. Another term is called REDS, relative energy deficiency in sport, because they're looking at athletes with this. Healthy bodies who are underfueled. And that's the response, the downregulation of thyroid and the hormone dysregulation, trying to conserve energy. It's documented, and yet there's a complete denial around this subject. Total cognitive dissonance of like, they just don't want to see it because it conflicts with the theory too greatly. And it's really, it's a little triggering for me, to be honest. It's a little triggering when I hear that and I go, my head starts to spin inside my head.
You understand it though, because you've been through it.
I have. And I put other people through it.
Yeah,
that's
exactly.
the hard part.
You feel it for others.
As a coach. And I'm like, it's like I did that to somebody.
It's the best that you knew in the situation. So that's like the only thing that you knew. You thought you were doing the best thing. The same for myself. When I was keto carnivore and I had this belief system that low carb is good and it's going to give me all these incredible benefits. Maybe there are some benefits associated for short periods of time, but doing it chronically, I don't think is like a healthy thing. Is what we're saying here is that I'm not anti keto, because I feel like the body taps into ketosis for a reason, right? This is another normal physiological response that is supposed to occur in certain situations, right? It's not like we are banning the fact that the body is like supposed to enter ketosis or gluconeogenesis or whatever. All of these responses by the body are natural and normal. They're supposed to occur at different times based on the circumstance, based on your nervous system state and the situation. So like context matters, right? And in some situations, a hormetic stressor like ketosis might be useful for some individuals at one point in time, like as a tool that you can use in your toolbox for a client. Maybe they don't manage to get their blood sugar down after going, on a higher carb, lower fat diet. Maybe we do need to put them into a stricter ketogenic state for a period of time if they're coming from a standard American diet, for example. And naturally, the body, even if you eat carbohydrates in the middle of the night, is supposed to enter mild ketosis. And this is a normal physiological response. And a lot of people don't actually understand that, that actually gives you a ton of benefits, because a lot of hormones are released at that time. You get a lot of regeneration and cellular cleanup that occurs because of this. Now, because when people hear this, they automatically think more is better. So let's chase ketosis 24/7. But what if your body has the inbuilt mechanism to keep you like healthy? You have that yin and yang, you have that daytime glucose and that nighttime fast with that elevation in, ketones. It's like a beautiful, like yin yang relationship.
Right. Right. Yeah, exactly. We shouldn't be chasing it as an extended period. I wouldn't use it. I am at the point now where I am right now. And again, my approach is subject to change. I would be very hesitant to use it with anybody for metabolic reasons, because I see the opposite happening. I see when I look at someone who's diabetic or has a fatty liver and they have metabolic disease, and they already have elevated stress hormone, and they already have a high level of gluconeogenesis and fat oxidation happening, and their fat blocking the mitochondria. I don't want to layer on top of that a diet that mimics that pathology. In other words, a diet that also elevates stress hormones, that limits the energy coming in, that increases the amount of fat that is blocking the mitochondria. To me, it's like repeating the same problem with your diet and layering it on top. By eliminating the carbs, you don't see as much of the blood sugar backing up as you would with a balanced diet. You don't see it, but I don't think it's helping the upstream problem of the clog. And so I think it's still adding to the stress hormone. It's adding to the fat available, the fat that has to be processed. So to me, it's like doubling down on the pathology. And the biggest I think benefit people have when they say, "Oh, I did this and I lost this much weight," well, then your body must have been really sick, and your diet must have been so bad that the ketogenic diet had that big of an impact. But at some point, the runway is going to run out, and eliminating processed food is often a benefit of the ketogenic diet. Eliminating all the grains, the processed grains and those chemicals coming into the gut when you have a dysbiosis in the gut, when you have that endotoxin in the gut, then by removing the grains and the carbs, you're letting the gut calm down, which could be creating the inflammation, creating the insulin resistance. It's not a metabolic problem at that point. It's a gut problem. So it's addressing it from a different means, but you wouldn't have to go keto to address that gut problem. You can just eliminate the foods that disrupt the dysbiosis or the endotoxin, and still consume carbohydrates. So there's a way to manage those issues without going keto and get the benefit. But that's where I'm because most of my focus tends to be on the mitochondrial problem. To me, that seems like doubling down on the problem, and it's prolonging the issue. Other than many times it eliminates the seed oils, which I think is, one of the root causes. And if that's a root cause, then someone can see a lot of benefit from doing that. But again, we don't have to go keto to eliminate seed oils.
No, thank you for sharing your viewpoint on that. I think that was important for me to hear. That I think it kind of like validates for me, like, my train of thought as well. But I just kind of thought that maybe there are some situations that you can use it, but maybe now you're convincing me right now. I'm starting to feel like, okay, maybe that actually isn't, because your body naturally would do this. I think the best state, honestly, like if someone wanted to do, ketosis, is fasting, because fasting like is the OG ketogenic state, right? Because when you're fasting, your body's going to tap into, ketones at some point, depending how long your fast is. But I just kind of feel that, obviously, I'm not a proponent of fasting either. I used to do intermittent fasting as well, and that also wrecked my energy levels and my thyroid and my health in general. So I stopped doing that too, because I was doing that alongside the ketogenic and low carb diets. Just like yourself, it's so funny how we all go through these similar patterns, right? We start doing all of the stressors until we realize that all of these stressors are not serving us. And then now we go like in the opposite direction. We're trying to like find that balance, that middle ground, and share this information with people so people can make an informed decision. And, we're actually just sharing the facts here. We're not trying to convince you to consume carbohydrates if you're a keto or low carb. We're just trying to educate you and bring you the awareness that there is another way. You don't need to suffer, and you don't need to eliminate your favorite foods, because a lot of people, they say to me, but what about the cravings? When I start eating carbs, I can't stop. Well, yeah, if you've been like carb depleted for a long period of time, your body is going to want to eat all the carbs, because it's going to realize that, hey, I can get them from an external source, and I can replenish all of my glycogen stores, and I don't need to be in a stress state. So of course, your your hunger levels are going to be high at the beginning, but then once your leptin starts working properly, because actually high carb refeeds help to reset leptin as well. They improve leptin sensitivity. And so that's actually quite incredible. But of course, if you do that chronically, it's not the best idea to overeat calories, but I'm just saying high carb refeeds, they do help to reset leptin and help to suppress appetite. So then you don't overeat in the long run. So actually, when you find that equilibrium, I think it's a great place. Zane, I think this has been an absolutely epic discussion. Thank you so much. Is there any last words of wisdom you'd like to share with the audience?
Stay curious, keep experimenting. I know that may be frustrating for some of you. For us, it's fun. But I think stay curious. Don't get too locked in. If you start seeing negative effects or negative symptoms from what you're doing, keep an open mind for what changes you can make, or what that might be telling you about, your body is trying to tell you. Don't get too locked in, and don't just take my word for it. I mean, dig in. There's some research out there. There is information out there. It's not just trust me. It's listen and then verify, and then experiment on your own and see how your body responds.
Yeah, and just don't fall for that confirmation bias, because it's just so easy. When you're in a specific group and you're following a specific group of eating, it very quickly becomes a cultish behavior where you just keep on reinforcing your own beliefs, even if it's not serving you, and you're just going more and more down a hole which you can't get out of, and then it's not gonna serve your health in the best way. So anyway, thank you so much, Zane. I really appreciate this discussion. Where can people find you, connect with you, work with you, buy your programs and packages?
So my website is zanegriggs.com. You can find my socials there. I'm most active on Instagram and YouTube. So at Zane Griggs Fitness on Instagram, it's at Zane Griggs on YouTube. And I'm actually kind of revamping some of my offerings. You can find a free download called Free 40 Plan. It's at free40plan.com, free 40 plan, which gives kind of how I approach a client between diet, exercise, recovery, some tips on peptides and hormone markers that you want to watch for, like fasting insulin, and what the optimal markers are for those. So it gives you a little bit of idea of how to look at your blood work and know what to look for. And it's a free download. But I do have a group. I'm starting a community in the next month or so. So if you're interested in knowing more about what I'm talking about, that will be available by the end of the year. So
that's fantastic. Awesome, Zane. I would absolutely love to do it again in the future. I'm sure I'm going to find some awesome, interesting topics from your Instagram page, and we'll do it again.
If you guys enjoy the topics and guests I bring on the show, I would really appreciate it if you left me a 5-star review on Spotify, and also subscribe to Fitness Wisdom Podcast on YouTube as well, as this helps to spread the knowledge and wisdom with the world. Until next time, this is the Fitness Wisdom Podcast.